Hello, you are on History of Business's channel. Imagine a world where a single feather could buy you a house, where the flutter of a plume on a hat symbolized power, prestige, and class, where beauty itself became an industry, and that industry nearly wiped a species off the map. This isn't fantasy, it happened. And at its peak, ostrich feathers were worth more than gold. In the 19th century, before Instagram and haute couture brands, luxury wasn't defined by logos. It was defined by display. The bigger your hat, the taller your plumes, the higher your place in society. Women in Paris, London, and New York paraded through the streets like exotic birds, wearing towers of feathers that shimmered in the sunlight. And behind that beauty was blood. This is the forgotten story of the ostrich feather craze, the fashion that destroyed ostriches. Part 1. The 1800s. Europe is transforming, factories rise, fortunes bloom, and the Industrial Revolution feeds a new class of rich merchants and socialites. But wealth alone isn't enough. People want to show they're wealthy. In a world where industrial soot darkened the skies, fashion became an escape, a glittering dream of luxury and refinement. For the newly rich, fashion wasn't clothing, it was identity. And nothing said elegance quite like feathers. Not just any feathers, ostrich plumes. They were long, soft, radiant, and rare. They curved gracefully, catching the light in a way no other material could. They whispered movement, wealth, and sensuality. At first, these feathers were imported in small quantities through African and Middle Eastern trade routes. But as Europe's appetite for extravagance grew, the demand exploded. London's hat makers couldn't get enough. Parisian milliners were paying fortunes. By 1850, the ostrich feather had become the symbol of sophistication, adorning everything from evening gowns to fans, jewelry, parasols, and gloves. Yet few people stopped to ask, where did all these feathers come from? Part 2. The answer lay far to the south, across deserts and savannas, in the harsh landscapes of Africa. For centuries, ostriches had roamed wild, their feathers prized but their population stable. That changed when European traders arrived with guns, greed, and gold in their eyes. Ostriches were massive, flightless, and tragically easy to hunt. Caravans swept across North Africa, Egypt, and the Cape Colony, slaughtering thousands just for their plumage. In a few short decades, wild ostriches were nearly exterminated in some regions. But as always happens, in capitalism, destruction breeds innovation. Around the 1832, settlers in South Africa began experimenting with a new idea. Instead of hunting ostriches, why not farm them? The concept seemed absurd at first. Ostriches were enormous, unpredictable birds with powerful kicks and temperamental behavior. But a few daring colonists succeeded. They fenced them, tamed them, and learned that feathers could be plucked safely without killing the bird. It was a revelation and a revolution. By the 1862, ostrich farming became one of the most profitable ventures in the British Empire. The white gold of Africa had been born. Part 3. The next 40 years were nothing short of madness. By the late 19th century, ostrich feathers were among the most expensive materials on Earth. In London, auctions traded plumes like stocks. In Paris, the price of a single ounce of fine feathers rivaled the wages of a working-class family for a month. And in South Africa, a dusty town named Oudtshoorn became the beating heart of this empire known as the feather capital of the world. Here, farmers built extravagant mansions called feather palaces. Roads were lined with imported marble. Carriages pulled by ostriches, yes, real ostriches, paraded through the streets as a display of absurd wealth. A single bird could earn more than a herd of cattle. 1 pound of feathers could sell for $500 in today's value. It was the 19th century version of a speculative gold rush. Or perhaps a crypto bubble made of feathers. The high society of Europe followed suit. The bigger, the better. Hats reached ludicrous heights, bending under the weight of entire feather bouquets. Feathers from male ostriches were most valuable, their symmetry perfect, their movement hypnotic. In ballrooms and banquets, The elite flaunted plumes as if they were diamonds. And the message was clear. If your hat didn't touch the ceiling, you weren't rich enough. Part 4. But like every empire built on obsession, the cracks appeared from within. By the early 1900s, everyone wanted in. The promise of easy money led thousands to become ostrich farmers. The market flooded with feathers. Prices began to dip. Then came something nobody expected, the automobile. In the 1,910 seconds, as open-top cars became fashionable, women discovered that tall, feathered hats were impractical. The wind shredded the plumes, ruined hairstyles, and made feather fashion look ridiculous. Suddenly, the ultimate status symbol became a nuisance. Simultaneously, a deeper cultural shift was brewing. The Edwardian age of excess gave way to modernism, minimalism, and the practicality of the Jazz Age. Women cut their hair short, dresses shrank, feathers fell out of favor. Then came World War I. Global trade collapsed, luxury goods were abandoned for survival. Feathers, once the pinnacle of fashion, were now absurd reminders of a decadent past. In just 5 years, the feather industry went from glory to ruin. Part 5. The crash was brutal. Farmers across South Africa went bankrupt. Mansions built on plumes were abandoned, windows broken, marble cracked, fountains dry. Entire towns dependent on feathers were reduced to ghostly silence. The feather barons, who had once dined on imported champagne, now sold their estates for pennies. Piles of feathers sat unsold in warehouses, rotting in the humid air. Their value, once measured in gold, vanished overnight. Some tried to pivot. They sold ostrich meat, leather, or eggs. But nothing matched the lost fortunes of the Feather Age. And just like that, an entire empire is evaporated. Here's the irony. While greed nearly destroyed the ostrich, it also saved it. The mass domestication of ostriches for farming had preserved the species. Wild populations were decimated, but farm-bred birds ensured survival. By the 1,930 seconds, ostriches were no longer a symbol of luxury. They were curiosities of history. The feather palaces stood as monuments to human vanity. The ostrich had outlived the industry built upon its back. Part 6. It would be comforting to think we learned our lesson, but have we? The ostrich feather craze wasn't about fashion. It was about desire without restraint. Today, we see the same story everywhere. Exotic animal trade for luxury handbags. The fast fashion industry destroying ecosystems for disposable trends. Even digital manias, crypto, NFTs, where intangible symbols of status inflate and burst. The cycle is eternal. Innovation, obsession, exploitation, collapse. A century ago, the ostrich feather was the luxury must-have. Today, it's replaced by microtrends, drops, and influencer marketing, but the psychology is the same. The object changes. The addiction does not. The ostrich feather craze wasn't just a strange footnote in fashion history. It was a mirror, a reflection of our endless hunger to turn beauty into profit and profit into status. As the final plumes of the feather age fell, so too did an illusion that luxury can last forever. In the end, the empire of feathers dissolved, but its lesson remains timeless. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And every time vanity returns, another empire of feathers begins to rise. If stories like this fascinate you, if you want to understand how money, power, and human desire shape the modern world, then you're in the right place. Subscribe and never miss the next forgotten empire.